for Nader and his groups.
The Reagan administration has announced a review of 30 additional government regulations to see if they are...
The administration's hit list of regulations include many protecting equal rights, prompting Ralph Nader to say,
in the last few months, it's been quite clear that the Reagan administration wants to, every way it can, remove the application of law and order to the operations of business.
These people knew how to play politics. They knew how to play hardball.
To be in Washington in the early years of the Reagan presidency with Ralph Nader and watching him react to the effort to kind of systematically undo what he had spent 20 years building.
It is time to reawaken this industrial giant, to get government back within its means, and to lighten our punitive tax burden. And these will be our first priorities, and on these principles there will be no compromise.
It's almost like a bad dream where Reagan would appoint to run these agencies, not just people who were from the industries that were being regulated, but people who had devoted their entire careers to tearing down and trying to destroy the very agencies they were now being charged to run.
The Nader people bravely tried to document what was going on, but the electoral power and the persuasive ability of Reagan was just too great.
There was a really fascinating memorandum written by Justice Powell when he was the general counsel of the Chamber of Commerce. And he said there's a threat to America. These public interest groups are a huge threat to America, and every corporation has to react.
At the time he wrote what's now known as the Powell Memo, he was an attorney. Of course, he did go on to become a Supreme Court justice, so this was not an obscure figure. This was a call to action by a leading corporate lawyer trying to rally the troops, saying, we're in trouble here, we got to do something very different.
And we have to take back the minds and the hearts of the students and the academics and the media, and we've got to fight them tooth and nail.
And that did spur the business community to reevaluate their role in politics and what they were doing.
Corporate America was investing considerable resources in propaganda efforts, in think tanks that would develop bogus disciplines like cost-benefit and risk management analysis to try to change the whole terms of debate.
And it has completely transformed the way politics take place in D.C. and across the country.
The Heritage Foundation is a free market think tank. We do research and educational efforts on the benefits of limited government, individual responsibility, strong national defense. We like to portray ourselves as having been Ronald Reagan's favorite think tank.
Ralph approached health and safety regulation as an ethical and social issue. Corporate America redefined it as an economic issue.
Corporations don't have that much power in Washington. They tend to be ineffective, especially on the big picture issues. They might be able to get a little special loophole in some bill or a special handout in another bill, but especially in a globalized economy where you have foreign companies penetrating the U.S. market, U.S. companies are probably about the most helpless entities out there.
These corporate think tanks go through their daily life thinking that their glass is only 97% full.
The 80s was a period in which the alliance between the Democrats and the public interest movement started to fray. Too often Democrats would not go to bat in the same courageous ways to protect the victories of the 60s and 70s. Ralph had relied upon a New Deal and Great Society coalition. That coalition started to fall apart.
The whole thing that we were trying to do was the Great New Deal coalition is to drive these wedges into that coalition, split it off, and take parts of it for the Republican base. And you did this with social, cultural issues. You carve off all their issues which do not conflict with your own and which comport with your own social, cultural beliefs, and keep hammering and hammering and hammering them. And the strategy was called in those days the Northern Catholic Southern Protestant strategy.
And so without the protective cover of that electoral base, Nader's political initiatives were far more vulnerable.
The Reagan era basically forced him to recreate himself He realized people in Washington weren't going to listen, so he would go straight to the people.
Consumer activist Ralph Nader has been campaigning.
He recreated himself as a grassroots activist.
It was the beginning of the change from the inside the Beltway Ralph to Ralph the out there in the whole country, touching people's lives every day. For a long time, they had just been writing theories out of Washington and things that people should do, but they weren't out there where the real action was. He said that I was his Paul Revere, that he would just throw me into the community not knowing anybody, and I would have to find out how to work on an issue, and then I'd call for reinforcements back in Washington. His first idea, which was wacky, was to have me parachute into towns and say, the Nader Raiders are here to help.
Well, I had this fantasy that wasn't totally whimsical, that we would have a crew of 5 civic paratroopers, and they would parachute into the town. The problem was you could never get them insured, and how could we be assured of the quality of the parachutes if the vendor knew what they were being used for?
But it got crazy because he would literally just leave me in any community. Once I got everybody going forward on an issue, Ralph would come in and give a speech to really empower them more and say, you guys aren't alone here.
When the community of Poletown in Detroit was going to be condemned so that General Motors could build a new Cadillac plant there, Ralph provided direct assistance for them to physically resist the bulldozers.
60,000 people here.
In Van Nuys, there were a lot of children coming down with leukemia in a neighborhood, and General Motors plant was there, and they put benzene in the paint, which is causing cancer and leukemia. We got them to change the way that they manufactured the paint.
Californians love their cars, but hate their auto insurance rate.
In the mid-'80s, we had a huge insurance crisis all over the country. The insurance industry sponsored proposals here in California to limit people's right to go to court. People didn't know who to believe or what to believe, but everybody knew that Ralph Nader would never betray them.
The insurance companies are financial, sacred cash cows feeding the public a lot of not-so-sacred bull.
So they voted yes on Prop 103.
And this is the victory for the little guy, for us.
And of course, Proposition 103 delivered $1.2 billion in rate refunds and $23 billion in savings in the first 10 years just on auto insurance premiums alone.
The second you would say, I'm a Nader's Raider, all of a sudden there was an instant credibility where people were like, I so much admire that man, I admire what he's done for this country.
So who's behind the money masters? The Council of Foreign Affairs. Over 3,000 of them were in Congress, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderbergers, the CIA, and even the Vatican. And that's right, they're Democrat and Republican. Basically protecting the interests of the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Morgans, the elite who control the majority of all the big corporations. And with their influence, it's quite difficult to have good labor laws and to stop the fraud that's been going on for years and years. And it's really unfortunate when they have basically bought off each candidate running for the United States presidency. So either way, we seem to lose, because Barack and Hillary and McCain basically put on a good show, and we basically buy into the fact that they're enemies. But they're not. They're basically traitors for the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and the Morgans, the elite that are running everything around the world. And it's getting worse and worse. And so we're going to need a lot of Ralph Raiders to help stop this pendulum that's basically in the power of the elite. And we need to demand that these puppets do exactly what they tell us they're going to do. And we need to fight for our rights within the justice system and preserve our rights.